The phone felt like it was burning through my palm as I stared at the unsaved number on my boyfriend's screen, a number I had seen before in his call history, always without a name attached, always conveniently erased from his recent calls list, and something in my gut told me that this was the thread I needed to pull if I wanted to unravel the truth about the person I had been sharing my life with for the better part of the past year. I was 19 years old, a legal adult by every measure, but still young enough to remember what it felt like to be 15 and vulnerable, to be courted by older men who made you feel special and mature, who told you that you were different from other girls, who made promises they never intended to keep, who saw your youth not as a reason to protect you but as an opportunity to exploit you. My boyfriend was 20 years old, 21 in August, and that age gap between us had always felt insignificant, a mere technicality in a relationship that seemed to transcend the ordinary boundaries of age and experience. But now, as I sat in his apartment surrounded by the artifacts of our time together, I realized that the age gap that had seemed so minor between us was a chasm when applied to someone even younger, someone whose brain was still developing, whose judgment was still forming, whose vulnerability was so acute that it bordered on the criminal to exploit it. The girl on the other end of the number was 16 years old, 15 when their relationship began, and my boyfriend, the man I had loved and defended and made excuses for, had been grooming her for the better part of a year, sending explicit messages, receiving explicit images, planning to meet with her while maintaining a facade of normalcy with me. I thought about all the times I had told him how I felt about people who preyed on minors, the passionate rants I had delivered about the importance of protecting young people, the disgust I had expressed for the men in my own childhood who had looked at me with predatory eyes, and I realized that he had listened to all of it, had nodded along, had agreed with me, while simultaneously engaging in the exact behavior I was condemning. The betrayal was so profound that it seemed to rewrite every moment we had shared, every kiss, every intimate conversation, every promise of a future together, all of it tainted by the knowledge that the person I was building a life with was capable of such calculated predation. Our relationship had started simply enough, the kind of casual physical connection that young people often find themselves in, two bodies finding comfort in each other without the weight of emotional expectations, but somewhere along the way, it had morphed into something more serious, something I had convinced myself was love. He was charming in that dangerous way that some people are, capable of making you feel like the center of the universe even as he was actively seeking attention elsewhere, and I had caught him talking to other people multiple times, had given him the benefit of the doubt multiple times, had convinced myself multiple times that his wandering eye was just a phase, a reflection of his insecurity, something that would pass as our relationship deepened. The toxicity of our dynamic was something I recognized even as I was living through it, the way he would explode over the smallest things, the way his anger would flare up without warning, the way I found myself walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring my words and actions to avoid triggering his rage. I had become an expert at reading his moods, at anticipating his needs, at contorting myself into whatever shape he needed me to be in that particular moment, and I had convinced myself that this was what love looked like, that relationships required work and sacrifice, that my unhappiness was just a temporary obstacle on the path to something better. When I tried to leave, he would threaten to end his life, would even attempt it in front of me, and I would stay because I couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for someone's death, because I had been conditioned from childhood to put other people's needs above my own, because I didn't yet understand that his threats were a form of manipulation, a tool he was using to keep me trapped in a relationship that was slowly eroding my sense of self. The discovery of the number in his phone was both a shock and a confirmation of everything I had suspected but refused to believe, a tangible piece of evidence that he was not the person I had convinced myself he was. I had seen the number before, remembered it because it was always saved under a name that I now realized was a cover, and when I found it again, this time unsaved, something in me snapped. I texted the number from my own phone, pretending to be someone else, asking if the person on the other end knew anyone by my boyfriend's name, and the response came quickly, too quickly, as if she had been waiting for someone to reach out. She said yes, said they had spoken about it, said they had decided to meet, and my heart plummeted into my stomach because I knew even before I asked, what this conversation was going to reveal. We arranged to meet in person, and when I saw her, she was so young, so painfully young, with the kind of open, trusting face that predators prey on, the kind of face I had worn myself at her age, when I had been so desperate for validation that I would have accepted it from anyone, regardless of their intentions. Her first question, the one that came out of her mouth before she even introduced herself, was whether I knew if he was meeting up with anyone underage, and I remember the words hitting me like a physical blow, the realization that I was now part of a conversation that should never have been necessary. I told her no, told her that he had told me about someone close to him making up that rumor about him, and even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a lie, or at least a half-truth, because I had always known something was off, had always sensed that there was a part of him he was hiding, had always felt that the man I loved was not the whole picture. She continued, her voice trembling slightly, and told me that she was underage, that she was 16 years old, that their relationship had started when she was 15, that she was turning 17 soon. She told me she had tried to end it because she didn't want to get him in trouble, but that somehow, it had fallen back into place, and I knew what that meant, knew that he had convinced her, knew that he had used all the same charm and manipulation on her that he had used on me. She showed me the messages, the explicit texts, the photos he had sent, the photos she had sent back, and I realized with a cold clarity that he was in possession of child pornography, that he was committing a federal crime, that the man I had been sleeping with was a predator in the most literal sense of the word. They were supposed to meet the day after I met up with her, which meant that he was actively planning to have sexual contact with a minor, a fact that made my blood run cold even as my mind raced through all the implications of what I had just discovered. The irony of the situation was not lost on me, the fact that I had been so vocal about my feelings regarding people who prey on minors, the fact that I had shared my own history with him, the fact that I had trusted him with the darkest parts of my past and he had used that trust to hide in plain sight. I had been surrounded by pedophiles my entire life, had been the victim of adults who saw my youth as an opportunity, and I had worked so hard to escape that cycle, to build a life where I was safe, where I was in control, where I could protect myself and eventually protect my own children. And now I was sleeping with one, eating with one, spending my days and nights with one, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, on some level, I had known, that some part of me had recognized the predator in him and had chosen to ignore it because I didn't want to be alone, because I was afraid of what my life would look like without him, because I had convinced myself that love was supposed to be difficult. The shock I felt was so profound that I couldn't access any other emotion, couldn't feel the anger or sadness or disgust that I knew I should be feeling, because my brain was still trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. I looked at him differently now, saw the way he interacted with young people, the way he positioned himself as a mentor or a friend, the way he sought out vulnerability and exploited it, and I wondered how many other girls there were, how many others I didn't know about, how many lives he had touched with his particular brand of predatory manipulation. I knew that calling the police was an option, that I could report him and let the legal system handle the situation, that there was a chance he would face consequences for his actions, that the girl he was planning to meet could be protected from the trauma that was waiting for her if their meeting went forward. But I also knew that the legal process would be complicated, that the girl was 17 now and the age of consent in Indiana was 16, that there might be loopholes he could exploit, that the justice system often failed victims in exactly these situations. I wanted his guardians to know, wanted them to be the ones to confront him, wanted them to handle it within their family so that I didn't have to be the one to destroy him, even though he deserved to be destroyed, even though he had done something unforgivable, even though I knew that my hesitation was just another form of the enabling that had allowed him to continue his behavior for so long. I broke things off with him, told him I couldn't do it anymore, told him I was done with the toxicity and the manipulation and the constant sense that I was being lied to, and he threatened to kill himself again, and I watched him. With new eyes, saw the performance for what it was, and I walked away anyway. He didn't know that I knew about the minor, didn't know that I had met her, didn't know that I had evidence, and I kept that information close to my chest because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, because I was still processing, still trying to figure out the right course of action in a situation where there was no clear right answer. I spoke to my mother, hoping for guidance, hoping that she would tell me what to do, that she would take the burden of decision-making off my shoulders. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, her face growing increasingly concerned as the details emerged, and then she told me something that I didn't want to hear but knew was probably true. There wasn't much I could do if the girl wasn't willing to get involved, because she was the victim, not me, and the legal system was designed to prioritize the needs of victims, even when those victims didn't know what they needed or were too scared to ask for help. She told me that I could report him, could provide the evidence I had collected, could make sure that he was on law enforcement's radar, but that unless the girl was willing to testify, unless she was willing to participate in the legal process, there was a good chance that nothing would come of it. She reminded me that I was young myself, that I was still figuring out who I was and what I wanted, that I had been through enough trauma in my own life and didn't need to take on the burden of someone else's trauma, especially when that someone else was a stranger who might not even want my help. I understood what she was saying, understood that she was trying to protect me in the same way I was trying to protect this girl, understood that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and let other people handle their own problems, but the knowledge sat uncomfortably in my chest because I had been that girl once, and I remembered what it felt like to be 15 and confused and desperate for someone to save me. I also spoke to a therapist, hoping that a professional perspective would provide some clarity, that someone with training in these situations would be able to tell me what the right thing was. The therapist echoed what my mother had said, explaining that my role in this situation was limited, that I had already done more than most people would have done by reaching out to the girl and her family, that the responsibility for reporting the crime ultimately lay with the victim or her guardians. She told me that I needed to prioritize my own healing, that I had been in a toxic and abusive relationship myself, that I needed to focus on understanding why I had been drawn to someone like him and how I could avoid similar situations in the future. She validated my feelings, acknowledged the betrayal and the shock and the anger, but she also gently reminded me that I couldn't save everyone, that I had to accept the limits of my own power, that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is let go and trust that others will make the right choices for themselves. I left the session feeling both relieved and frustrated, relieved because I had permission to stop carrying the weight of this situation, frustrated because I wanted to do more, wanted to be the hero in this story, wanted to save the girl from a future that I had glimpsed in my own childhood. I took some of the advice I had received, reached out to the girl again, and this time spoke to her parents as well, hoping that a direct conversation would spur them to action. The conversation was difficult, the mother defensive and angry, more upset that I was speaking to her daughter about the situation than about the situation itself. She told me that her daughter was fine, that she was a mature young woman who could make her own decisions, that I was overstepping my bounds by interfering in their family business. I tried to explain the power dynamics at play, the way older men can manipulate younger women, the long-term psychological damage that can result from these relationships, but she wasn't interested in hearing it, wasn't interested in protecting her child the way I wished someone had protected me. The girl herself seemed conflicted, stuck between loyalty to the man who had made her feel special and the dawning realization that what they had was wrong, that he had been taking advantage of her, that she deserved better. I gave her my contact information, told her to reach out if she ever needed anything, told her that there were resources available if she wanted to pursue them, and then I stepped back, because I had done everything I could, because I had to accept that I couldn't force her to make choices she wasn't ready to make. My decision not to go to the police directly was a difficult one that I still second-guess in the quiet moments when I can't sleep, when I wonder if I made the right choice or if I was just too scared, too tired, too overwhelmed to do what needed to be done. I had the evidence. The text messages, the pictures, the video of her verbally confirming the situation, the admission from her mother that she knew and didn't care, and I could have handed it all over to law enforcement and let them sort it out. But I also knew the reality of the legal system, knew that prosecuting these cases is incredibly difficult, knew that the age of consent being 16 in Indiana created a legal grey area, knew that the girl was technically within her rights to make her own decisions, even if those decisions were being manipulated by an older man. I thought about the impact on his family, on his parents who had raised him, on the other people in his life who might not know what he was capable of, and I realized that I didn't want to be the one to destroy his life, even though he deserved to be held accountable, even though the thought of him continuing his behavior without consequences made me feel physically ill. I rationalized my decision by telling myself that the girl's mother was the one who should be making these choices, that she had the responsibility to protect her child and was failing in that responsibility, that I had done everything I could and now I had to let go. 1 month has passed since I found out, and I am still processing, still trying to understand how I got myself into this situation, still grappling with the knowledge that I spent almost a year of my life with a person who was capable of such calculated predation. The relationship ended the moment I discovered the truth, and I have maintained my distance since then, refusing to answer his calls, refusing to engage with his attempts to manipulate me back into his life. He doesn't know that I know about the minor, doesn't know that I met her, doesn't know that I have all the evidence I would need to destroy him, and I have decided to keep it that way, because telling him would only give him an opportunity to manipulate the situation further, to spin the narrative in his favor, to make me doubt what I know to be true. I have accepted that I will probably never get the closure I want, never hear him admit what he did, never see him face consequences for his actions, and that acceptance has been both liberating and painful. Liberating because it frees me from the need to control a situation I can't control, painful because it means letting go of the hope that justice will be served. The girl and I have had a few more conversations, mostly through text, and she seems to be taking small steps toward recognizing what happened to her, though she is not yet ready to take any formal action. I have directed her to resources, to hotlines, and support groups and websites that can help her understand the dynamics of grooming and exploitation, and I have told her that I am here if she ever wants to talk. I don't know if she will reach out, don't know if she will ever be ready to confront what happened, don't know if her mother will ever come around to protecting her daughter the way she should, but I have done what I can, and I have to be at peace with that. My therapist tells me that I am doing the right thing by focusing on my own healing, that I cannot pour from an empty cup, that I need to rebuild my own sense of safety and trust before I can help anyone else. I am taking her advice, going to therapy regularly, processing the trauma of the relationship, trying to understand why I stayed with him for so long, why I ignored the red flags, why I convinced myself that his behavior was acceptable. I am learning that I have a pattern of seeking out relationships with men who are emotionally unavailable, who take more than they give, who make me feel like I have to earn their love, and I am working to break that pattern, to value myself enough to walk away at the first sign of trouble instead of staying and hoping things will change. I think about my boyfriend sometimes, about the person I thought he was and the person he actually turned out to be, and I feel a complicated mix of emotions that I'm still learning to untangle. There is anger, of course, hot and bright and consuming, anger at the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, anger that he made me complicit in his predation by keeping me in the dark while he pursued someone half my age. There is also sadness, a grief for the relationship I thought I had, the future I had imagined, the person I believed he was, and sadness for the girl who is still entangled in his web, who doesn't yet understand the full scope of what has been done to her. There is confusion, a sense of disorientation that comes from having your reality upended, from realizing that the person you trusted most was hiding something so monstrous, from questioning whether you ever really knew them at all. And there is also, surprisingly, a sense of relief, a lightness that comes from finally being free of the toxicity, the manipulation, the constant walking on eggshells, the sense that I was losing myself in a relationship that was never healthy to begin with. I have decided not to pursue this further, to let go of the need to see him punished, to trust that the universe will eventually hold him accountable for his actions even if the legal system fails to do so. This decision has not come easily, and there are still moments when I wake up in the middle of the night, consumed by the need to do something, to report him, to expose him, to make sure that no other girls fall victim to his particular brand of manipulation. But I have learned, through therapy and through the support of my family, that I am not responsible for saving everyone, that I cannot carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, that sometimes the healthiest thing I can do is walk away and focus on my own healing. I have blocked his number, removed him from all my social media, purged my apartment of any evidence of our time together, and I am slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding my life without him. I am 19 years old, still young, still learning, still growing, and I am determined not to let this experience define me, not to let his actions become my trauma, not to let the darkness of what I discovered overshadow the light of who I am trying to become. The weight of knowing is heavy, but I am learning to carry it, to integrate it into my story without letting it consume me, to find a way forward that honors both my own healing and the girl who is still trying to find her way out of the situation he created for her.